This week is hopefully the time when it actually happens. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's budget is due to be presented this week, but it appears it is yet to be approved. So will it even happen? Godongwana's reworked budget will be presented, or is meant to at least be presented, on Wednesday. His speech was postponed in February, of course, after the cabinet failed to agree on government's proposed 2 percentage point VAT hike. Now, government needs to fund a 60 billion rand shortfall. This week, the Democratic Alliance reportedly said there's still no consensus yet, and that a cabinet meeting is only scheduled, wait for it, for Wednesday morning. That's the day of the budget, Wednesday morning. Will this budget actually even happen this time around, even on the 12th of March? Let's see. Let's continue the conversation around the budget speech then. Let's also take a look specifically at value-added tax in South Africa. When did we adopt it? Why? The history of it? Why do some countries, perhaps a few, manage without it? Andrew Donaldson is a senior research associate at the Southern Africa Labour and Development Research Unit then at the University of Cape Town. Mr. Donaldson, appreciate the time. Thank you for joining us this morning. Why is there VAT?
Good morning. Happy to be here. Why do we have VAT?
Yeah, why is that? Why do we even have it?
So value-added tax is essentially a tax on consumption. So it's a tax of 15% on most of the things that a household buys from week to week, furniture, household goods, etc. I think people know there's some exemption, there's some zero-rated items, so there's some basic food items that are not in the VAT basket. But that's the simplest way to understand what VAT is, that it's a broad tax on consumption. It is the biggest source of tax apart from personal income tax. So personal income tax raises the most revenue in our tax system. But after that, the value-added tax is the second largest contributor. So I'll tell you a bit about the history.
Yeah, please.
The value-added tax was introduced in South Africa in 1990, September 1990, as a recommendation of the Commission of Inquiry into the tax structure, which was chaired by Judge Cecil Margot, appointed in 1986. And before that, we had a general sales tax. General sales tax was introduced in the 1970s, and its rate was increased from 4% to 6%, 8%, 12% in the early 1990s, and then it was replaced by the value-added tax. And understanding why value-added tax replaced the general sales tax is an important part of understanding why economists and fiscal specialists like the value-added tax. GST, the general sales tax, was levied on many different things as a point of sale tax. So if you went into a shop, you paid general sales tax. And the problem with a sales tax of that kind is cascading. Cascading refers to to the impact of the tax as intermediate goods in the production process are taxed, and that tax on the intermediate goods. So you think of a restaurant that is buying supplies, foodstuffs for its restaurant business. It's buying equipment. It pays tax on those, and then it also has to charge tax on its sales, on its restaurant sales, or think of any small business. So there's a cascading, there's an escalation of the effective rate of tax that the consumer is paying in a general sales tax system. Value-added tax gets rid of cascading, and it does so because a business has to charge tax on its sales, but it gets a refund from the revenue service on its purchases. So it's only taxing the value add. There's been a tax on the value added already paid by the farmer or the manufacturer producing equipment, and that tax is paid at the point by that producer, but then it's refunded in the hands of the business that finally sells to the consumer. And so you clean out the cascading problem, and you get a standard rate of tax on consumption goods. apart from the things that are zero rated. So
Okay.
that's the big advantage of a value-added tax system.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why most countries in the world have a VAT now. Almost all the European countries, the East Asian countries. The really big exception is the United States, which doesn't. And if you like, I'll talk a bit about that because that's related to some of the big
Okay.
tax issues that are going on in the world at the moment. But there's a big advantage in VAT in that it is this flat rate on consumption, and
Yeah.
that's why it's favored.
Okay, hold on. We'll get to the USA perhaps not having VAT per se as we currently know it then. But very quickly, from a South African context, if we continue to just raise VAT, for example, you're said to be making the poor pay ultimately more than everybody else. At the same time, and this is for everybody to help understand as well that point of view, why is it, however, that we still have zero-rated goods, which are eggs, bread, your basic goods that everybody eats ultimately? Those are zero-rated, meaning that you don't get charged the tax on those items, and yet VAT is always considered to be affecting the lower end, or the lower LSM as it's called then, which is lower earning people. Why is that the case?
Yes, so the zero ratings on basic foodstuffs is an attempt to make the tax a bit fairer, so that it's a somewhat lower tax on low-income households where basic foodstuffs, are a larger share of their consumption basket. When this thing gets studied, when analysts go and try to work out what proportion of their spending households are paying on VAT, we find that it's fairly proportional, that roughly speaking, right up the income distribution, people are spending about the same percentage of their income or their consumption basket through paying in tax. So it's not all that regressive, and the zero rating of basic foodstuffs is what makes it less regressive or makes it more of a proportional tax. But nonetheless, it is paid by everybody. The personal income tax is not paid by households or individuals earning an income below about 100,000 Rand a year. So whereas the personal income tax is progressive, you pay a much higher rate if you're a high income earner. VAT is broadly proportional, and that's the controversial thing about it. And it's always been controversial. Many of your listeners will remember that when VAT was introduced in 1991, initially at a rate of 10%, there were widespread protests. There was a lot of public concern about the potential regressiveness of the tax. At that time, the intent was only to zero rate two foodstuffs, maize meal and brown bread. And there were widespread protests, and when the VAT was actually introduced in September 1991, that list of basic foodstuffs was extended to 9 items. And then in 1993, when the VAT rate was increased from 10% to 14%, further foodstuffs were added to the list, and today there are about 20 or 21 basic foodstuffs mainly that are zero rated. There were a few items added when the rate was increased, as you mentioned, from 14% to 15%. So the tax authorities try to keep it fair, try to keep the base broadly proportional by zero rating. But nonetheless, from a tax collection point of view, one of the advantages of that is that it is paid by everybody. And so it's a very broad tax base. It contributes substantially to the revenue system. It does have the effect, of course, of reducing the disposable spending power, the real effective spending power, not just of the poor, but of everybody.
Yeah.
And that's why it's this announcement that the minister was going to make but didn't make, of raising it from 15% to 17%, caused such an outcry.
Yeah. You were talking about countries that don't necessarily have it. I mean, I found a few as well. Jersey, Gibraltar, Hong Kong, Kuwait. They also don't have any VAT. Neither does the US.
Yes, so those are small countries which are effectively able to generate a huge amount of tax from the businesses that are there because they're low tax jurisdictions and so on and so on and so on. But the US is the really big case. And let me say a little bit about that, because in the US, the federal government can't charge sales tax. It's a constitutional clause that has hamstrung the American tax system for ever since the Constitution was established. Sales taxes are levied by states and to some extent by municipalities, and every state has its own sales tax system. And so that problem of cascading happens in many of these states. So there are taxes on some things that are built into the tax, so the next thing that's produced in the value chain. There are also incredible complexities to businesses that operate across the entire United States. They have to take into account that they have to incorporate into their business systems the different sales tax systems in different states. And if you think about the rise of online trading, online sales, if you're an online sales operator and you're selling in different states, you've got to accommodate the different tax system. There's a lot of revenue lost because of the complexity of it. But the Americans are stuck. The Constitution says you can't have a federal system, and these long-established sales tax systems that are very difficult to interfere with because the states are so powerful in the American system. And I'm just mentioning this an aside. So we all know that President Trump is now trying to impose these import taxes on the rest of the world.
Yes, and
he thinks that because the rest of the world is charging VAT on imports, just as we do, our VAT system has zero rates exports, but charges tax on imports, so that there's effectively a fair tax system between imported and domestically produced goods. President Trump looks at the rest of the world and he says they're charging VAT on what we export. We don't have VAT on things that are imported in the US. That's not fair, and that's part of his motivation for trying to raise these import taxes on the rest of the world. It's part of why he says, "Oh, the rest of the world has been cheating America and raising so much tax from America. We need to start doing it ourselves." But what he's not really incorporating into his analysis is that the American sales taxes that are levied by their states are all taxed on imports as well. So that's where the effective import taxes are in the consumption taxes of the US.
Yeah.
And it's so complex. That's the change that fiscal analysts, tax specialists would want to make in the US, is to make a transition to the value-added tax system. It's so much better as a tax structure. But he's not doing that, and instead going in this direction that is just going to backfire and is going to have devastating consequences for trade internationally. So that's a bit of a detour from our topic here this morning, but it's, I think, an interesting feature of the present geopolitical environment.
Yeah, I think it certainly is. Let's just finally, from yourself, what do you think happens then on Wednesday? One, do you think we have the budget? Two, if we're not going to increase VAT, which seems to be the primary thing here, that we don't increase VAT, where does the money then come from?
Well, we don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. I understand that the Treasury is keen to include a VAT increase, but at a lower rate, perhaps, than the 2%, which was initially proposed. So there may be some other tax measures that are proposed. The tax on fuel could go up. It hasn't gone up in the last budget or two. There are a few other tax options. They could be less generous in providing relief in the personal income tax system. We know that that's part of what was going to be proposed a few weeks ago. But in the end, it's about the spending side and not the revenue side. You know, the economy is growing so slowly. When the economy only grows at less than 1% in the last year in real terms, or at less than 5% in nominal terms, so that's including inflation in the economy, inflation plus the real growth in the economy, less than 5%. But the government is also increasing salaries of public servants by 5.5%, and that's just the basic increase. And there are other aspects of the promotion systems that raise costs and compensation. You think of education, health, they've got to expand employment. So spending is growing faster than revenue. And it's in the spending side that government is really going to have to take tough decisions over the period ahead.
Yeah.
My view is that the Treasury and the Ministry of Finance have talked about expenditure reviews, have talked about trying to target spending better, find the areas where there's too much being spent on things, find the areas where some of the things that government does could be could become private sector activities. I think the training systems that are funded through the skills levy is an example of that.
Yeah.
Those are the decisions that have to be taken. But
Sure,
we're deferring
sure.
those decisions. Every budget we say spending reviews have to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. That's
Yeah.
going to be the thing to watch for the years ahead.
Yeah, it sounds more than just a balancing act, really, from the budget, from the finance minister here. Andrew, really intuitive and really educational conversation as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Andrew Donaldson, Senior Research Associate of the Southern Africa Labour and Development Research Unit